November 14th, 2003, 11:42 p.m., 212 feet beneath the surface of the East China Sea. The sound hit Petty Officer Second Class Daniel Rourke like a freight train through his headphones. A high-pitched, steady ping, mechanical, deliberate, and unmistakable. His blood turned to ice. In 14 months aboard the USS Asheville, a Los Angeles-class fast attack submarine, he had heard that sound exactly once before, during a training exercise off the coast of San Diego. But this was no exercise. There were no scheduled drills, no Allied vessels within 40 nautical miles. The ping was real, and it was getting louder. His fingers trembled as he adjusted the gain on his AN-BQQ-5 sonar display. The bearing was constant. The frequency was textbook. He ran the acoustic signature through the onboard library in 3.6 seconds. The result made his stomach drop. A U-6 torpedo, Chinese-manufactured, wire-guided, with an active terminal homing seeker. It had locked onto their hull. Daniel ripped one earpiece off and turned to the watch officer behind him. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Sir, I have a torpedo in the water. Bearing 035. Closing fast. Active seeker. It's locked on us." Lieutenant Commander Greg Harlan, the officer of the deck, froze for exactly 1 second. Then he reached for the intercom to call the captain. But before he could press the button, a calm, almost amused voice came from the aft doorway of the control room. "Rourke, what the hell are you talking about?" Commander James Whitfield, captain of the USS Asheville, stood in the hatchway in his blue coveralls, a coffee mug in his hand, his reading glasses still perched on his forehead. He had been reviewing personnel evaluations in his stateroom. He looked like a man who had been interrupted during a crossword puzzle, not a man whose ship was about to be destroyed. "Captain," Daniel said, his voice climbing, "I have an active torpedo seeker on our hull. Classification is consistent with a U-6. It is not a drill signal. Request immediate evasive action. Emergency deep. Right full rudder. Deploy countermeasures." Commander Whitfield took a sip of his coffee. He looked at Daniel the way a father looks at a child who insists there's a monster under the bed. And then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a laugh born from shock or disbelief. A genuine, dismissive laugh. The kind that says, "You're wasting my time." "Son," Whitfield said, "we are in international waters. 70 nautical miles east of the Zhoushan archipelago. The Chinese Navy is not firing torpedoes at United States submarines. Stand down. If you're already hooked and want to know what happened next aboard that submarine, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, and trust me, this story is far from over. To understand how Daniel Rourke ended up in that sonar room, pleading with a captain who wouldn't listen, begging a man to save a crew of 134 souls, you have to go back 19 months. You have to go back to a small apartment in Norfolk, Virginia, where a 23-year-old kid sat on the edge of his bed and made a decision that would define his entire life. Daniel Rourke grew up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, the second of 4 children born to a postal worker and a school cafeteria manager. His father, Thomas Rourke, had served in the Navy during the late 70s aboard the USS Skipjack, one of the first nuclear fast attack submarines in the fleet. Thomas never talked much about his service. He never wore a veteran's hat or put a bumper sticker on his truck. But every year on the anniversary of his discharge, he would sit alone on the back porch with a bottle of Narragansett beer, staring at nothing, and the children knew not to bother him. Daniel was not the best student in his family. That was his older sister, Christine, who went to the University of Rhode Island on a full academic scholarship. Daniel was not the most athletic. That was his younger brother, Patrick, who played varsity hockey and had college scouts calling by his junior year. Daniel was the quiet one, the one who sat in the back of the classroom and drew submarines in the margins of his notebooks, the one who could hear the difference between a robin and a sparrow from inside a closed room, the one whose hearing was, according to the Navy audiologist who tested him during his enlistment physical, in the top 1% of all candidates tested in the last 5 years. He enlisted in the Navy at 19, right out of high school, because college felt like a path designed for someone else. His mother cried. His father shook his hand and said only 3 words: "Listen to everything." Daniel thought he meant it as general life advice. He would later realize his father meant it literally. After boot camp at Naval Station Great Lakes in Illinois, Daniel was selected for the Navy's basic enlisted submarine school in Groton, Connecticut, known informally as Sub-School. For 8 weeks, he learned the fundamentals of submarine operations: damage control, basic nuclear propulsion theory, submarine safety, and the unforgiving physics of living and working beneath hundreds of feet of ocean. He graduated 7th in his class of 48, but it was at the next stage of his training that everything changed. Daniel was sent to the Fleet Sonar School, also in Groton, for the acoustic intelligence training pipeline that would turn him into a sonar technician, the ears of the submarine. And from the very first day, his instructors knew they had something unusual on their hands. Sonar operation on a submarine is not like operating radar on a surface ship. Radar sends out a signal and reads what bounces back. It is active and direct. Submarine sonar is, for the most part, passive. You sit in a dark room, you put on headphones, and you listen. You listen to the entire ocean, and then you try to separate the sounds that matter from the sounds that don't. A shrimp snapping its claws sounds like static. A distant cargo ship sounds like a low hum. A whale sounds like a whale. But a submarine, an enemy submarine running quiet at 4 knots, sounds like almost nothing. A faint whisper of machinery, a tiny vibration in the propulsion system, a barely perceptible change in the ambient noise floor. Finding that sound is like trying to hear a single whisper in a stadium full of screaming fans. Most sonar technicians take months to develop the ear. Daniel Rourke had it on day one. His instructor, a senior chief named Wendell Oates, who had spent 22 years listening to the ocean, pulled Daniel aside after the second week of training. "Rourke," he said, "I've trained over 300 sonar techs in my career. You hear things I have to point out 3 times before anyone else picks them up. Whatever gift you've got, don't waste it." Daniel didn't think of it as a gift. He thought of it as the thing he was supposed to do. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the quiet kid in the back of the room. He was the best person in the room. And that feeling, that sense of purpose, of belonging, was something he had never experienced before. He was assigned to the USS Asheville SSN 758, a Los Angeles-class fast attack submarine homeported in Guam. The Asheville was not one of the glamorous boats. It wasn't a Seawolf or a Virginia class, the newer, quieter submarines that got all the attention in the naval press. The Asheville was a workhorse. Commissioned in 1991, it had spent over a decade conducting surveillance patrols, intelligence-gathering missions, and freedom of navigation operations throughout the Western Pacific. It was old, it was loud compared to newer boats, and its crew loved it the way people love a car with 200,000 miles on the odometer. Not because it was impressive, but because it was theirs. But what Daniel Rourke did not know, what he could not have known when he reported aboard in April of 2002, was that the USS Asheville was about to be sent into the most dangerous waters in the Pacific, and that the man commanding it, Commander James Whitfield, had a fatal flaw that no performance review had ever captured, no superior officer had ever flagged, and no crew member had ever been able to articulate until it was almost too late. James Whitfield was not a bad officer. That was what made him dangerous. He was, by every measurable standard, an excellent one. He had graduated in the top 15% of his class at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. He had served with distinction aboard 3 previous submarines, earning commendations for his tactical judgment and his calm demeanor under pressure. He had completed the Navy's prestigious submarine command course and had been personally selected for command of the Asheville by the commander, Submarine Force Pacific. His fitness reports were immaculate. His crew respected him. His superiors trusted him. But there was something underneath all of that competence, something that only revealed itself in specific, high-pressure moments when the stakes were genuinely life or death. Commander Whitfield did not believe that the world was as dangerous as it actually was. This was not naivety. It was not ignorance. It was something more insidious. It was a deeply held conviction, buried so far beneath layers of professionalism and protocol that even Whitfield himself may not have been fully aware of it, that the systems in place, the rules, the treaties, the diplomatic channels, the unwritten codes of conduct between rival navies, would always prevent the worst from happening. He believed in his bones that no one would actually pull the trigger, that the game was always a game, that the other side, whoever the other side happened to be, was playing by the same rules. This belief had never been tested. Not really. Not until November of 2003. The tensions in the East China Sea in late 2003 were not the kind that made the front pages of American newspapers. They were quiet, technical, and deeply dangerous. The People's Republic of China was in the middle of a massive modernization of its submarine fleet. For decades, China's submarines had been loud, outdated, and easily tracked by American sonar. The old Romeo and Ming-class diesel boats were so noisy that American sonar technicians joked you could hear them from San Francisco. But that was changing fast. By 2003, China had begun deploying the Song-class diesel-electric submarines, Type 0339 and the improved 0339G. These boats were a quantum leap forward. They were quieter, more capable, and equipped with modern weapon systems, including the U-6 Torpedo, a weapon modeled closely on the American Mark 4880 cap. The U-6 was wire-guided with active and passive homing capability, a range of approximately 25 nautical miles, and a warhead large enough to break the back of a destroyer. Against a submarine, a direct hit would be catastrophic. The United States Navy was keenly aware of this modernization, and in the fall of 2003, the USS Asheville was tasked with a surveillance mission in the East China Sea. The official designation was routine intelligence gathering. The unofficial reality was that the Asheville was being sent to find, track, and record the acoustic signatures of China's new submarines, to learn what they sounded like, so that every American sonar operator in the Pacific would know how to detect them in the future. It was exactly the kind of mission the Asheville had done dozens of times before. It was exactly the kind of mission that Commander Whitfield considered routine. And that word, routine, would become the most dangerous word on the boat. The Asheville departed Guam on October 28, 2003, and transited northwest toward the East China Sea. The crew settled into the familiar rhythm of submarine life. 6-hour watch rotations, meals in the cramped crew's mess, movie nights in the torpedo room, the constant low hum of the reactor, and the recycled air that always smelled faintly of oil and sweat and coffee. For the first 2 weeks, the patrol was uneventful. Daniel Rourke sat his watches in the sonar room, listening to the ocean, cataloging biologics, marine life sounds, and tracking the distant rumble of commercial shipping traffic. But on November 12th, everything changed. Daniel was on the midwatch, midnight to 6 a.m., when he picked up a faint contact bearing roughly north-northeast. It was subtle, almost invisible in the ambient noise, a tiny mechanical whisper, low frequency, intermittent. Most sonar operators would have dismissed it as biologics or a distant trawler, but Daniel's ears were different. He tracked the sound for 47 minutes, adjusting filters, narrowing bandwidths, isolating the frequencies, and then he had it, the unmistakable sound of a diesel-electric submarine running on battery power. He classified the contact as a probable Song-class submarine, designated Sierra 1 by the Fire Control Tracking Party. The contact was roughly 12 nautical miles to the north, moving slowly on a southwesterly course. It appeared to be on a routine patrol. Lieutenant Commander Harlan, the officer of the deck, immediately notified the captain. Whitfield came to the control room, reviewed the sonar data, and nodded approvingly. "Good work, Rourke," he said. "Let's get in close and get a good recording. This is exactly what we're here for." Getting in close meant closing the distance to Sierra 1 to approximately 4 to 6 nautical miles, close enough to get a detailed acoustic recording of the Chinese submarine's machinery and propulsion systems. It was a standard intelligence gathering maneuver, but it was not without risk. At that range, if the Chinese submarine detected the Asheville, things could escalate quickly. For the next 36 hours, the Asheville shadowed Sierra 1 with exquisite precision. Daniel barely left the sonar room. He ate sandwiches at his console and slept in 20-minute intervals in the chair. He was in a state of focused intensity that he had never experienced before. Every cell in his body attuned to the sound of the Chinese submarine, tracking its every movement, recording every acoustic signature. And then, on the evening of November 13th, Daniel heard something that made him sit up straight. A second contact. Bearing northeast, much closer than Sierra 1 had been when first detected. A second submarine. He designated it Sierra 2. This one was different. It was quieter than Sierra 1, more disciplined in its sound profile, and it was moving on a course that, if projected forward, would bring it dangerously close to the Asheville's current position. Daniel immediately reported the contact. Lieutenant Commander Harlan looked at the plot and frowned. "2 boats," he said. "That's unusual for this area." "Sir," Daniel said carefully, "Sierra 2's track suggests it may be aware of our general position. It's on an intercept course." Harlan relayed this to Commander Whitfield, who came to the control room for the second time that day. He studied the tactical display for several minutes, then shook his head. "It's coincidence," he said. "We're in a major shipping lane. Chinese submarines patrol this area regularly. 2 boats in proximity is not unusual. Continue the mission." Daniel wanted to protest. Everything in his training, everything in his gut, told him that Sierra 2 was not there by coincidence. The course, the speed, the timing, it all pointed to a coordinated effort. Sierra 1 was the bait. Sierra 2 was the hunter. But Daniel was a petty officer second class, 23 years old with 14 months of fleet experience. Commander Whitfield was a senior naval officer with nearly 2 decades of service. The hierarchy was absolute. But what the captain didn't know was that Daniel's instincts were not just instincts. They were the product of a gift, a neurological capacity for acoustic processing that put him in a category shared by perhaps a few dozen people in the entire United States Navy. And that gift was now screaming at him that something was terribly, dangerously wrong. The next 14 hours were the longest of Daniel Rourke's life. He tracked both contacts continuously, refusing to leave the sonar room even when his relief arrived. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, the senior sonar technician aboard the Asheville, tried to order Daniel to get some rest. Daniel refused. "Chief," he said, "something is wrong. I can't explain it yet, but something about Sierra 2 is wrong. I need to stay on it." Webb, a 17-year veteran who had done 8 submarine patrols, looked at Daniel for a long moment. He had learned over the years to trust the instincts of exceptional sonar operators. The ocean talked to some people differently than it talked to others. "Fine," he said, "but if you fall asleep at that console, I'm writing you up." Daniel didn't fall asleep. He didn't even blink, it seemed. He sat in the pale green light of his sonar display, headphones clamped over his ears, and he listened. He listened to every sound in the ocean around them, every click, every hum, every vibration. And slowly, painstakingly, he began to build a picture of what was happening. Sierra 2 was not just patrolling. It was maneuvering slowly, carefully, with the patience of a predator. It was working its way into a position directly behind the Asheville. In submarine warfare, the area directly behind a submarine is called the baffles, the blind spot where the submarine's own propulsion noise masks the sounds coming from astern. It is the most dangerous place an enemy can be, because it is the one place you cannot hear them. By 10 p.m. on November 14th, Daniel had enough data to be certain. Sierra 2 had positioned itself in the Asheville's baffles. It was less than 4 nautical miles away, and its torpedo tubes, Daniel was almost sure of this based on the faint transient sounds he had detected, were open. Open torpedo tubes on a submarine mean one thing: the crew is preparing to fire. Daniel turned to Chief Webb, who was standing behind him reviewing the track data. "Chief," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Sierra 2 has flooded tubes. I'm hearing flow noise consistent with torpedo tube preparations. He's in our baffles at less than 4 miles." Webb's face went white. He grabbed the intercom. Con, Sonar, emergency report, Lieutenant Commander Harlan answered immediately. Sonar, Con, go ahead. Sir, Sierra 2 is in our baffles. Range approximately 4,000 yards. Sonar holds possible torpedo tube flooding transients. Recommend immediate baffle, clear, and evasive maneuver. There was a pause on the intercom, then Harlan's voice, tense and controlled. Sonar, Con, stand by, alerting the captain. Commander Whitfield arrived in the control room 2 minutes later. He had been in his stateroom reading. He looked irritated. Daniel watched him from the sonar room doorway as Harlan briefed him on the situation. Whitfield listened, then walked over to the sonar displays himself. He looked at the data. He looked at the track. He looked at Daniel. Rourke, he said, you're telling me a Chinese submarine has flooded torpedo tubes and is preparing to fire on a United States Navy submarine in international waters? Yes, sir, Daniel said. During peacetime. Sir, the acoustic data is during peacetime, Whitfield repeated, his voice harder now. Do you understand what you're suggesting? You're suggesting that the People's Liberation Army Navy is about to commit an act of war against the United States of America. Sir, I'm not suggesting anything about their intentions. I'm reporting what I'm hearing. The acoustic data is consistent with torpedo tube preparations. Sierra 2 is in a firing position. Whatever their intentions are, we need to maneuver now. Whitfield stared at Daniel for a long moment. Then he turned to Harlan. What's your assessment, Greg? Harlan hesitated. He was caught between two forces. The raw data that Daniel was presenting, which was alarming, and the judgment of his commanding officer, which he was trained to defer to. Sir, he said carefully, the data warrants caution. I recommend at minimum a baffle clear to get a better picture. A baffle clear was a simple maneuver, turning the submarine to one side to temporarily eliminate the blind spot astern and allow the sonar to get a clear listen in all directions. It was standard practice. It was safe. It was the absolute minimum response to what Daniel was reporting. Whitfield shook his head. If we turn now, we'll lose our tracking position on Sierra 1. We've been building this acoustic profile for 36 hours. I'm not throwing that away because Rourke thinks he hears something in the baffles. Sir, Daniel started. That's enough, petty officer. Return to your station and continue monitoring. If you get a definitive torpedo in the water, you report it. Until then, we maintain course and speed. Daniel returned to his console. His hands were shaking. He put his headphones back on and closed his eyes, blocking out everything except the sound. The ocean was speaking to him, and what it was saying was, "You are running out of time." For the next hour and 42 minutes, Daniel tracked Sierra 2 with every tool available to him. He adjusted filters, he ran frequency analyses, he cross-referenced acoustic signatures with the onboard database, and with each passing minute, the picture became clearer and more terrifying. Sierra 2 was not just in a firing position. It was actively tracking the Asheville. The Chinese submarine's sonar was painting the American boat with intermittent active pulses. Short, low-power pings designed to refine a firing solution without alerting the target. Most sonar operators would have missed them entirely, mistaking them for biologics or ambient noise. But Daniel heard them. He heard every single one. At 11:38 p.m., Daniel detected a change in Sierra 2's acoustic profile, a subtle shift in the machinery noise, a new sound, high-frequency, mechanical, precise. He had heard this exact sound once before, during a training exercise. It was the sound of a torpedo's active seeker head spinning up. That was when the torpedo hit the water. At 11:42 p.m., the sound exploded through Daniel's headphones. The high-pitched, steady ping of an active torpedo seeker locked onto the hull of the USS Asheville, a U-6 torpedo bearing 035, closing at approximately 45 knots. At 4,000 yards, they had less than 3 minutes. Daniel ripped off his headphones and screamed, not a shout, a scream. The kind of sound that comes from a place beyond training, beyond protocol, beyond rank. Torpedo in the water, bearing 035. Active seeker. It's locked on us. The control room erupted. Harlan lunged for the ship's general alarm. The piercing electronic tone blasted through every compartment of the submarine, jolting 134 men from sleep, from meals, from conversations, from the mundane routines of submarine life into the most primal state a human being can experience, the certainty that death is coming. And that was the moment Commander James Whitfield appeared in the control room doorway with his coffee mug and laughed. The laugh lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds, something broke aboard the USS Asheville. The trust between a crew and its captain, the invisible essential bond that makes a submarine crew function as a single organism, cracked like ice under a boot heel. "Rourke," Whitfield said. "I told you." "Captain," Chief Webb's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The senior sonar tech was standing at his console, headphones on, his face ashen. "I have it. Active torpedo seeker, bearing 035. Range approximately 3,000 yards. Closing? This is real, sir. This is not a drill." Time stopped. Or rather, time compressed. The next 90 seconds contained more decisions, more actions, and more consequences than most people experience in a lifetime. Whitfield's face changed. The amusement drained out of it like water from a sink. For the first time in his career, the world was not behaving according to his expectations. The system, the rules, the treaties, the unwritten codes, had failed. Someone had actually pulled the trigger. But here is the thing about command at sea. The thing that separates the officers who survive from the officers who don't. It is not about being right. It is about being fast. And whatever his flaws, whatever his blind spots, Commander James Whitfield was fast. "All ahead flank," he barked. "Right full rudder. Make your depth 600 feet. Launch countermeasures." The helmsman slammed the engine order telegraph to flank speed. The submarine's reactor surged, driving the main turbines to maximum power. The Asheville's single propeller bit into the water and the boat lurched forward, accelerating from 5 knots to over 30 in a matter of seconds. The diving officer pushed the control yoke forward, angling the submarine's bow toward the deep. The hull groaned as the boat plunged, the depth gauge spinning. 300 feet, 400, 500. Behind them, the countermeasures, acoustic decoys designed to confuse torpedo seekers, launched from the submarine's hull with a series of sharp pneumatic thuds. The devices mimicked the acoustic signature of the Asheville, creating phantom targets that the torpedo's seeker would hopefully lock onto instead. In the sonar room, Daniel kept his headphones on. He had a job to do, tracking the torpedo, reporting its bearing and range, guiding the ship's evasive maneuvers. His fear was still there, a cold weight in his chest, but it was buried beneath 14 months of training and the absolute crystalline focus that comes when survival depends on precision. "Con, sonar," he reported, his voice now steady, almost robotic. "Torpedo bearing 035, range 2,000 yards, speed approximately 45 knots. Time to impact, 1 minute 40 seconds. The submarine was turning and diving simultaneously, a corkscrew maneuver designed to present the smallest possible target and maximize the distance from the torpedo's predicted track. The hull popped and creaked as the pressure increased with depth. Men grabbed onto whatever was closest, pipes, consoles, bunks, as the deck tilted 30 degrees. "Con, sonar, torpedo bearing shifting, now bearing 040. Range 1,500 yards. Countermeasures may be having effect. Torpedo appears to be tracking intermittently." A murmur of desperate hope rippled through the control room. If the countermeasures could confuse the torpedo's seeker for just a few seconds, if they could buy enough time and distance. "Con, sonar, torpedo bearing, now 045 and opening. Range estimate 1,200 yards. Seeker appears to have shifted to a countermeasure. Torpedo is tracking away." For 5 seconds, no one breathed. The only sounds were the hum of machinery, the creak of the hull, and the faint receding ping of the torpedo's seeker through Daniel's headphones, growing fainter, pulling away, chasing the phantom. "Con, sonar," Daniel's voice cracked. "Torpedo is past astern. Bearing 170 and opening. Seeker has locked onto countermeasure. Torpedo is tracking away from us." The explosion came 11 seconds later, a deep, resonant boom that shuddered through the water and rattled the hull of the Asheville like a drum. The torpedo had detonated on one of the countermeasure decoys, roughly 800 yards behind and above the submarine, close enough to feel, far enough to survive. In the control room, Commander Whitfield stood motionless, gripping the periscope stand with both hands. His coffee mug had shattered on the deck at some point during the evasive maneuver. His face was the color of wet cement. "Sonar," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "Status of Sierra 2. Daniel listened. The ocean was still reverberating from the explosion, the sound waves bouncing off the thermocline in the sea floor, creating a confused, noisy environment. But beneath the noise, he could hear it. Sierra 2 was moving fast. The Chinese submarine had gone to high speed, heading northeast, opening the distance, running. "Con, sonar, Sierra 2 is cavitating at high speed, bearing 020, range opening rapidly." "He's running, sir." "And Sierra 1? Daniel checked. "Sierra 1 bearing 340, range approximately 8 nautical miles. No change in behavior. He may not have been involved." Whitfield nodded slowly. He looked around the control room at his crew, men who, 60 seconds ago, had believed they were going to die. Men who were now looking at him with expressions ranging from relief to rage. "Secure from general quarters," Whitfield said quietly. "Set the maneuvering watch. Come to course 180. Make your depth 400 feet. Speed 8 knots. He paused. "And get me a secure communication channel to SubPac. Now." The message that went out from the USS Asheville to Submarine Force Pacific headquarters at Pearl Harbor that night was classified at the highest level. It described in precise military language an unprovoked torpedo attack on a United States submarine by a vessel assessed to be a People's Liberation Army Navy Song-class submarine operating in international waters. The message requested immediate guidance and reported no casualties or damage to the ship, thanks to the timely detection by the Sonar Watch team and effective employment of countermeasures. What the message did not say, what no official communication would ever say, was that the timely detection had almost not happened, that the captain of the USS Asheville had dismissed the warnings of his sonar operator, that he had laughed, that 134 men had come within 90 seconds of dying at the bottom of the East China Sea because one man believed the world was too civilized for such things to happen. The response from SubPac came within 2 hours. Disengage immediately. Clear the area at maximum sustainable speed. Proceed to Yokosuka Naval Base in Japan for debriefing. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to re-engage or track the Chinese submarines. Do not discuss the incident on any unsecured communication channel. The Asheville ran south at high speed for the next 18 hours. The atmosphere aboard was unlike anything the crew had ever experienced. Submarine crews are tight. They share everything: air, water, food, space, noise, silence. They develop a collective psychology, a shared emotional state that rises and falls with the fortunes of the boat. And the collective emotional state of the Asheville's crew in those 18 hours was a volatile mixture of relief, anger, fear, and a deep, unsettling loss of confidence in the man responsible for their lives. Daniel Rourke did not sleep. He sat in the sonar room, headphones on, monitoring every sound in the ocean around them, because he no longer trusted anyone else to keep the crew safe. Chief Webb sat beside him for most of the transit, not because he needed to, but because he understood what Daniel was going through. At one point, Webb put a hand on Daniel's shoulder and said, "You did your job, Rourke. You did it perfectly. Remember that." Daniel nodded, but didn't look up. He was replaying the moment in his mind, the moment the captain laughed, and he couldn't make it stop. That laugh would live inside him for the rest of his life. Not because it was cruel, not because it was dismissive, but because it represented something that Daniel, at 23 years old, was only beginning to understand: that competence and wisdom are not the same thing, that a man can be excellent at his job and still be catastrophically wrong about the world. The USS Asheville arrived at Yokosuka Naval Base on November 16, 2003. The crew was met at the pier by a team of officers from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, the Office of the Commander of Submarine Force Pacific, and representatives of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The debriefing lasted 4 days. Every member of the crew was interviewed individually. Sonar recordings were analyzed in minute detail. Track reconstructions were built and rebuilt and built again. Daniel's testimony was the centerpiece. He sat in a windowless conference room in the base headquarters building and recounted every moment of the incident, from the first detection of Sierra 1 to the detonation of the torpedo on the countermeasure. He spoke for 3 hours without a break, his voice steady, his recall precise. When he finished, the senior investigating officer, a captain with silver eagles on his collar and the submarine warfare insignia on his chest, looked at Daniel for a long time. "Petty Officer Rourke," he said, "your detection and classification of the torpedo gave the ship approximately 150 seconds of warning. Standard reaction time for a torpedo evasion scenario is 60 to 90 seconds. You effectively gave your ship an extra minute. At the closing speed of that torpedo, that extra minute translates to approximately 2,000 yards of additional separation. Without that separation, the countermeasures would likely not have been effective." He paused. "You saved 134 lives, including your own. I want you to understand that." Daniel understood it intellectually, but understanding it emotionally would take years. The aftermath of the incident unfolded on multiple levels, most of them invisible to the public. On the diplomatic level, the United States filed a formal protest through classified back channels with the People's Republic of China. The Chinese government denied the incident entirely. They claimed that no PLA Navy submarine had been operating in the area described. They suggested that the acoustic data was misinterpreted and that the American submarine had likely detected a training exercise involving inert weapons. The United States, unwilling to reveal the extent of its submarine surveillance capabilities, did not press the matter publicly. The incident never appeared in any newspaper, any press briefing, or any congressional testimony. It was buried in the classified world, known only to those with a need to know. On the military level, the incident triggered a comprehensive review of submarine operating procedures in the Western Pacific. New protocols were established for the employment of sonar assets during surveillance missions. Minimum safe distances from tracked contacts were increased. Rules of engagement were updated to give commanding officers greater latitude to take evasive action based on the assessment of their sonar teams. The lessons of the Asheville were quietly absorbed into the institutional knowledge of the submarine force. On the personal level, the consequences were both immediate and lasting. Commander James Whitfield was quietly relieved of command of the USS Asheville 6 weeks after the incident. The official reason given was reassignment to support command readiness initiatives, the kind of bloodless bureaucratic language that the military uses to end careers without public embarrassment. Whitfield was transferred to a desk job at the Pentagon, where he served out the remaining 18 months before his retirement. He never commanded a ship again. Those who served with him in those final months described a changed man. The confidence that had once been his greatest asset was gone, replaced by a haunted, second-guessing caution that made him ineffective as a staff officer and miserable as a human being. He knew what had happened. He knew that his judgment had nearly killed 134 people. And he knew that the young sonar operator he had laughed at was the only reason they were all still alive. In 2005, shortly before his retirement, Whitfield wrote a letter. It was 2 pages long, handwritten on plain white paper, and it was addressed to Petty Officer Second Class Daniel Rourke. The letter was delivered through official Navy channels. Daniel received it at his new duty station aboard the USS Hawaii, a Virginia-class submarine to which he had been transferred as a recognition of his exceptional ability. The letter said, in part, "I have spent every day since November 14th, 2003, asking myself why I laughed. I did not laugh because I thought you were wrong. I laughed because I was afraid you were right, and I could not accept what that meant. Accepting that the world is more dangerous than we want it to be is the hardest thing a commander can do. I failed at that. You did not. I owe you my life, and I owe you an apology that no letter can adequately convey. I am sorry. Daniel read the letter once, folded it, and put it in his locker. He did not respond, not because he was angry, though he had been angry for a long time. He did not respond because he did not know what to say. What do you say to a man who laughed while you were trying to save his life? What do you say to a man who admits he was wrong, when being wrong almost killed everyone? Daniel had no answer to those questions at 25. He would still have no answer at 45. But the letter did something important. It closed a loop. It confirmed what Daniel had always known but had never been able to prove, that the captain's failure was not one of competence but of courage. The courage to accept the worst-case scenario. The courage to act on fear rather than suppress it. The courage to trust a 23-year-old kid with exceptional hearing over 2 decades of experience and a lifetime of assumptions. Daniel Rourke served in the United States Navy for 12 more years after the incident on the Asheville. He rose to the rank of Senior Chief Petty Officer, the highest enlisted sonar technician rate in the submarine force. He served on 4 more submarines, trained hundreds of young sonar operators, and was twice awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for his contributions to acoustic intelligence. He became known throughout the submarine community as one of the finest sonar technicians of his generation, a man whose ears were so sensitive that colleagues joked he could hear a fish think. But throughout his career, Daniel carried the weight of November 14th, 2003. Not the fear of the torpedo that faded over time, as fear always does. What stayed was the lesson, the understanding that the most dangerous thing in any crisis is not the threat itself, but the refusal to believe that the threat is real. He incorporated this lesson into every training session he ever conducted. He told every young sonar operator the same thing. Trust your ears, trust your training, and if the captain doesn't believe you, make him believe you. Your job is not to be liked. Your job is to keep the ship alive. After his retirement from the Navy in 2017, Daniel returned to Rhode Island. He settled in a small house in Warwick, not far from where he grew up. He worked part-time as a consultant for a defense contractor that specialized in submarine acoustic technology. He spent his weekends fishing in Narragansett Bay, where the water was calm and the loudest sound was the cry of the gulls. His father, Thomas Rourke, was still alive then, 81 years old, retired from the post office, living in the same house in Pawtucket where Daniel had grown up. On the day Daniel came home from his final deployment, Thomas was sitting on the back porch with a Narragansett beer, just as he had every year on the anniversary of his own discharge. Daniel sat down next to him. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Thomas said, "Did you listen to everything?" Daniel thought about the sound of the torpedo seeker in his headphones. He thought about the captain's laugh. He thought about the letter in his locker. He thought about 134 men who went home to their families because he heard something and refused to stop reporting it. "Yeah, Dad," he said. "I listened to everything." Thomas nodded. He took a sip of his beer. He did not ask any more questions. He did not need to. Some conversations between submariners require no words at all. In the years since the incident, several developments have confirmed the gravity of what happened beneath the East China Sea that night. In 2006, a Chinese Song-class submarine surfaced undetected within torpedo range of the USS Kitty Hawk carrier strike group during exercises near Okinawa. The incident, which was reported publicly, stunned the American naval establishment and demonstrated that China's submarine capabilities had advanced far beyond what many had assumed. When Daniel read about that incident in the newspaper, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He had been tracking a Song class 3 years earlier. He knew exactly how quiet they could be. And he knew that if the submarine that surfaced near the Kitty Hawk had decided to fire instead of surface, the outcome could have been catastrophic. The 2006 incident became a watershed moment in American naval planning. It accelerated the development of new anti-submarine warfare technologies, increased funding for submarine acoustic research, and reinforced the importance of the sonar operator, the human listener, in an age of increasingly automated warfare. Machines could process data, but only a trained human ear could distinguish the subtle, ambiguous sounds that meant the difference between a false alarm and a real threat. Daniel followed these developments with quiet satisfaction. He never spoke publicly about the Asheville incident. It remained classified, and he respected that classification even after his retirement. But he knew that his experience, and the experience of every sonar operator who had ever sat in a dark room and listened to the ocean, had contributed to the evolution of a critical national defense capability. In 2019, Daniel was invited to speak at the Naval Submarine School in Groton, where he had trained 17 years earlier. The invitation came from the current commanding officer of the school, who had served as a junior officer aboard the Asheville during the 2003 deployment. The officer had never forgotten that night. Daniel stood in front of a classroom of 40 young men and women, the next generation of submarine sonar technicians, and told them a story. He did not tell them about the torpedo or the captain's laugh or the letter. Those details were classified. Instead, he told them about listening. "The ocean is not silent," he said. "It is the loudest place on Earth. It is full of life, full of sound, full of information. Your job is to hear the thing that matters in the middle of all the noise. Sometimes that thing is quiet. Sometimes it is ambiguous. Sometimes you will not be sure. And sometimes the people above you will not believe you. But you have to report what you hear, every time, without hesitation. Because the day you stop trusting your ears is the day you fail your ship. He paused and looked out at the young faces in the classroom. Some of them were 19, the same age he had been when he enlisted. They had the same look he remembered having. Eager, nervous, uncertain of their place in the world. "One more thing," he said. "Your ears will hear things that your brain doesn't want to accept. That's normal. That's human. But you are not in this room because you are normal. You are in this room because someone tested your hearing and decided that you have a gift. Use it. Trust it. And never, ever let anyone convince you that what you're hearing isn't real." The room was silent. Then, from the back row, a young woman raised her hand. "Senior Chief," she said. "What if the captain doesn't listen?" Daniel smiled. It was a sad smile, the kind that comes from experience that cannot be shared. "You make him listen," Daniel said. "You say it louder. You say it again. You say it until he can't ignore you. Because at the end of the day, your job isn't to follow orders. Your job is to keep 134 people alive. And if you have to make someone uncomfortable to do that, then that's what you do." He thought about Commander Whitfield. He thought about the letter. He thought about the laugh. And he thought about something that he had never told anyone. Not Chief Webb, not his father, not anyone. In the moment when the torpedo was in the water, in the moment when the countermeasures launched and the submarine dove and the hull screamed with the pressure, Daniel had not been thinking about his own survival. He had not been thinking about his family or his future or his fear. He had been thinking about one thing, the sound. The torpedo seeker ping, high and steady and relentless, growing louder in his headphones. He had been tracking it, reporting it, guiding the ship's evasion, not because he was brave, but because that was what his ears were made to do. And in that moment, he understood something about himself that he had never understood before. He was not the quiet kid in the back of the room. He was not the one who couldn't keep up with Christine's grades or Patrick's hockey. He was the one who could hear the torpedo. He was the one who could save the ship. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to do. That understanding, quiet, private, unshakable, was the thing that carried Daniel Rourke through the rest of his career and the rest of his life. Not medals or commendations or recognition. Not the gratitude of 134 men who never knew how close they came to dying. Just the knowledge that when the moment came, his ears were ready, and so was he. The East China Sea is still dangerous. The submarines are quieter now, both American and Chinese. And the acoustic cat-and-mouse game that has been played beneath its waters since the Cold War continues every day, invisible to the world above. Young sonar operators sit in dark rooms on American submarines, headphones on, listening to the ocean, searching for the sound that means danger. Some of them were trained by Daniel Rourke. Some of them heard the story, the authorized version at least, of what happened on the Asheville. And all of them know the first rule that Senior Chief Rourke taught. Trust your ears, even when no one else does, especially when no one else does. Because somewhere out there, beneath the waves, in the dark, in the silence that isn't really silence, there's a sound that matters. And the only thing standing between that sound and disaster is the person wearing the headphones. Listen to everything.